Yeah, I was actually going to ask you as a kind of probably the last point is let's talk about the data, because ultimately what there is very available. Well, we have the data that shows the difference between cold calling, what you've just described, warm calling, and then there's kind of actual inbound lead sales calling, and they all have different data points on. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the things that you should be monitoring. So for us, it's you built it, Henry. So it's the connection rate, right? So how many people are you actually getting hold of? That actually doesn't matter, right? Whether it's a cold list or warm list or whatever, you've still got to actually get hold of the person, which can be difficult, but there are various different tactics you can use. But again, it doesn't really matter if it's cold or warm. The big difference, the big difference is the is the success from the call to an additional activity after that. And from what I've seen with cold calling, it's actually under 0.2 or 3%. So you need to do huge volume to see a return on your investment. So you've either got to use very, very low cost labor, and then you run the risk of having such poor people on the phone, you're shooting yourself in the foot, or you use some kind of AI bot to do the calling for you. So that, and so it's really important, I think, for people to actually build out the financial models to work out which tactic works for them best, which is why we focus on high ticket sales. Because as soon as you've got that relationship hook, the real one, that reason for calling, your success metrics go from like under 0. Whatever it is, to about 45%, 50%. And you can then work out the cost of that resource to do that to and then you can factor in what your conversion rate is and your average contract value. So I think, for people when they're considering which tactic to use, you've got to do the financial modeling. And it's now very easy to work out which tactic will suit you best.
Totally, but I also think
that I've missed out on that you think are important for modeling out tactics and
well, I think a lot of this just came back to what we talked about in the summit as well, and people always talk about it, but it's the key. If you don't have a tightly defined ICP and master accounts list that you are, trying to hunt strategically certain accounts over a period of time, that's where people go wrong. The cold calling, the volume thing was born out of the SaaS world. They weren't interested in doing that at the lower levels. They would go after volume. So if you're doing big ticket founder-led sales, or even with one BD, that's always going to be a struggle. So I think, before this is you've got to have those foundations in place of, right, what is the ICP that we're really going after? How are we going to meet them? What are we doing to develop the relationship? You need those things in place, and then not look at it just in terms of activities and kind of volume, but actually look at your progress on an account level, person level and account level. Great. Here's, I don't know, NatWest Bank. We've got 3 engaged prospects. These ones we're going to warm call because of X. You've got to start looking at it on an account basis and person basis rather than just a volume and activity basis. If you do that, then I think, over the kind of mid to long term, you get much, much higher results.
I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see with warm calling or appointment setting is moving on too quickly to other accounts, hoping for a quick win. And I think, the benefit of having a very tightly defined ICP, and as we call it here at Outset, a Nifty 50, is like, we know there is a relationship hook with this 50 accounts. We know there is something there. We know they need what we are selling. It is worth us trying to get hold of them over the next 2 months before we move on. Now, we talked about this yesterday, Henry. We're not advocating calling them 8 times a day, every day for 2 months. But understanding that it's worth that kind of focus and effort before deprioritizing, I think is very, very important. Otherwise, you burn through your ICP and suddenly you start diluting it, hoping for those quick wins. So I think it's very important for founders, for leaders of sales team adopting this practice to understand sometimes how long it can take to break through it into an account and have that conversation. And that's really, really important, because otherwise you start. Otherwise, you will burn through your warm prospects too quickly, and you'll end up in the cold calling realm again.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Nope.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. See you in the next episode.